right, guys, what is up? Welcome back to another episode. And those of you who are following along in international politics are going to be well aware about, in particular, Donald Trump's attitude towards migrants, but the US attitude in general, as it seems lately, towards foreigners. And all of this stuff going on with deportations. And we even saw that the German government had issued warnings to its citizens traveling to the US that it is not beyond the realms of your imagination that you might actually be detained. And so, and in particular, I suppose the worst imagery is these guys in masks that are, descending on university campuses and just like lifting somebody out and that's it, they're gone. Or we're hearing about these stories where these squads of guys masked are, the ICE, as they call them, the ICE, the Immigration and Customs Control or whatever it is. But these guys are going to hardware stores, going to anywhere that it's likely that migrant workers will congregate. So the idea being that, the Mexican worker that is collecting lumber from a hardware store or something like that, that's where you're likely to find those guys because they're collecting stuff before they go on and get a job or do some work somewhere. And so this has been grabbing a lot of headlines. This has been going on for quite a while. And what it is it's populism, to use the old term. Trump is a populist president. He's pushing this whole agenda of we need to be looking after ourselves. We shouldn't be looking after other people from outside of the country. America first, as they say. And one of the problems with this is, the rise of Donald Trump. One of the problems with the rise of Donald Trump is that it has been really, really effective. And it has, especially in this age of social media and stuff like that. And because it's so effective, there are other politicians around the world that are noticing how effective it has been. And they're suddenly going, whoa, I need to borrow some of these traits, some of these strategies, some of these tactics, because I'll get popular in my country. And so we are seeing this rise of populism around the world. And with the rise of populism, it is also coming with it the rise of anti-immigrant behavior. Anti-migrant behavior. And you're seeing a lot of people out there on social media saying, we don't want them coming in and all this kind of stuff. And the sentiment is it's getting more and more vocal. People are starting to voice their opinions more publicly. It's no longer something that is seen as a taboo topic now to kind of raise your give your opinions on this kind of stuff. Whereas in the past, you might have been quietly thinking it, but you wouldn't necessarily say it out loud. But that has changed now. And my wife is from another country. And she says that she has noticed it herself, which is, from my point of view, it's kind of sad to see that, the mother of your children who are Irish, who were born in Ireland, herself feels a certain reluctance to speak in her native language to the kids or to her mom if she gets a call from her mom or something like that. And the reason she's fearful of this is it's not so much that she lives in fear, but she's conscious of the fact that the situation has changed. And if you're speaking away in a foreign language, there's a possibility that somebody will kind of like say something or do something or think something. And so she's kind of keeping her personal stuff to herself. She won't speak to her mom on the phone. She'd rather take the call in the car where she's privately able to have that conversation, rather than doing it, say, out in public where somebody could overhear you and maybe you get some sort of feedback from them that they're not too fond of you or something like that. Now, at the same time, I can also understand there is a widespread sense of frustration around the country, particularly because of the housing crisis, but also because of the way the housing crisis is being dealt with. So a lot of people out there struggling to get a home. A lot of people on housing lists for a long time trying to get themselves on a home. And then at the same time, you hear things about these emergency accommodation figures being, there's guys that arrive at the airport, they've lost their passport, they're looking for asylum. Guys coming in on car ferries, same kind of thing. You hear about this, and then you see the amount of money the government is spending on accommodation services for them. And you suddenly go, my God, like the amount of money this is costing the nation. Just this past quarter, so the quarter number 2, so that would be April, May and June of this year, the government spent 450 million euro on emergency accommodation for asylum seekers and things like that. That's 150 million a month on this kind of thing. And so when you see that and you hear those kind of figures and you start thinking about, why is it the anti-immigrant sort of backstory is there, or the kind of the murmurings that we're hearing. And a lot of the time it's because of this. There's a frustration out there at the amount of money that is going into this. And yet there doesn't seem to be similar amount of money or effort going into fixing the housing crisis and resolving it. I mean, if you were spending 150 million a month on the planning services, if you were spending it on construction, bringing in, building new accommodation to accommodate new workers and stuff like that, that might be better money better spent. That would be a kind of a view that I think a lot of people would share. So this anti-migrant sentiment is quite easily understood, and it is a consequence of that frustration and also unscrupulous politicians using the Donald Trump playbook in order to further their own political ambitions. So it's very easy to go out and sort of say, why are all these guys coming in here? We should be looking after our own. And that is a message that you can get behind. But the question has to be asked, should we fear migration? And should we close our borders or start behaving the way the US have? And to answer that, I think it's a good idea to look in a few areas. Number one, we should look back on history. But number two, we should study the statistics and the predictions for population growth and look at what's going on around the world. So Ireland's population today is unique in Europe. And that is because the famine of 1840, if you're Irish, you will know about the Irish famine that took place in 1945, 46, 47, I think it is. Those 3 years when the potato crops were lost to blight, and millions of people either left the country or died of starvation. And that left us with this demographic hole in our population that has lasted for almost 200 years. We are the only country in Europe that has a smaller population today than it did 180 years ago. And so even if you look at, you think about the 1840s and you say, okay, there was a huge drop in the population, but then a full 90 years later, so from the 1840s until the 1950s, the population was still declining. And it actually got to the point where the rest of the world was enjoying this boom following World War II, when the end of World War II created this post-war boom. And all of the countries around the world were experiencing this boom, except Ireland. What Ireland was going through was stagnation, and it was continuing to see outward migration. All of the Irish people born were going and seeking jobs in other nations like the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, wherever you can think. And it got to the point where there was actually a theme that was spoken about quite a lot, and it was the vanishing Irish. It was not something that was kind of talked about as a joke. It was actually something that was looking like it was actually possible that Ireland would become an uninhabited island at some point if the trajectory of those numbers were to continue. Even in my own lifetime, like in the 1990s, I can remember when I started studying architecture, when I started first year in 1991, I can remember even then, there was still this view that as soon as you qualify, you'll be on the boat or the plane to the US or the UK. There was no jobs in Ireland. That was the kind of a view. And it suddenly changed around about 95. I can remember all of a sudden there was this sort of a bit of a property boom starting and stuff was happening. And it was funny, prior to that, around 1991, 92, you didn't see that. So our population today, the predictions that are coming out is that it will not get past the peak of the 1840s, which was 6.5 million. We will not see us passing that point until around 2050. And so this will make the famine of 1840 a 200-year event in terms of the effect it had on the demographics of Ireland. And if you think about it from a statistical point of view, you can go and have a look at this in the Central Statistic Office, and you can also check it out, ask ChatGPT and stuff. But for a population to replace itself, for it to kind of continually grow or even just maintain its current pace of population, the fertility rate needs to be 2.1 per person. So that is the number of kids that a woman will have in her lifetime. If the population is 2.1, if the fertility rate is 2.1, if a woman is going to have 2.1 children on average in her lifetime, then the population will replace itself and you won't see a decline in numbers. But what's important to note is that in the 1960s and 1970s, Ireland's fertility rate was actually 4-1. And so the average woman was having 4 children in her lifetime. Now, fast forward to today, the 2020s, that number is 1.5. So what that means is that we are actually looking at population decline in this country. And population decline, whilst at the same time we're looking at migration growing in the country and stuff like that, it does mean that most of the people that are the population growth that's taking place is not taking place in the form of Irish-born people. It's taking in form in the place of migrants coming into the country. And so unless we have continued migration coming into the country, we will be looking at a population decline rather than an incline. Now, you might kind of think to yourself, well, that's not such a bad thing because we have a housing crisis, don't we? And like, if we had less people coming into the country, we'd have more homes for everybody. And that is an understandable sentiment to have if you're one of the people that don't have a home. But a new report from the Department of Finance, it has predicted population growth over the next 40 years. And it's looking at the population is going to grow from 6.7 million to 7.6 million people in the next 40 years. Now, that's a huge population, and it means that we're looking at a continuation of the kind of 40 to 50,000 people a year coming into this country for the next 40 years, like a continuous stream. And that is 40 to 50,000 houses a year that we need as a population. Now, if the fertility rate remains at this 1.5, then all of that growth is going to be migrants coming into the country. And so the Irish, if you consider me, for example, I sent off my a sample and I got my DNA results back for one of these ancestry websites. It's called ancestry.com. If you basically spit in a small little vial and you send it off, and they go and they take your DNA, and it tells me that my DNA is 99.6% Irish. So my parents were Irish, my grandparents were Irish, their parents were Irish, and there's such a small percentage of my DNA that is not Irish. Today, that's going to be very, very different for the vast majority of people born in this country now, because of the mix of our population and stuff. The chances that you'll be 99% Irish is almost nil. And so that is, I don't really have an opinion either way on that. It is a fact, okay? Now, you might kind of think, well, this is terrible. We need to kind of protect our Irishness and keep, pure Irish people there, and for there still to be a possibility of things like 99% Irishness. But you've got to look abroad at what's happening in terms of the trends around the world. And this is really, it's quite interesting if you look at Japan, for example. Japan has a major issue on its hand with aging population. And in Japan at the moment, okay, the figures are that every 1 minute, so continuously all the time happening, every 1 minute in Japan, 3 people die. And in that same 1 minute, 1.3 people were born on average. So that means that every minute of every day, the population is declining by 1.7 people. So at the end of, a week or whatever, do that multiplication. 1 minute, 1.7 people less in the country. And so what this means is that the population that are there at the moment, there's an older population that are dying off, but the younger population is not coming in to replace them. So you're going to end up in a situation where old age people that require assistance, whether it's an old age pension or a state pension or hospital care, all that kind of stuff. It's currently 23% of the population are those old age people. But over the next number of years and maybe a couple of decades, that number is going to increase to 55% in Japan. And that means that there's a smaller amount of people working, paying taxes, and those taxes are going into supporting the older people. And this is one of the big problems, one of the reasons why we do actually have to embrace migration. Inward migration means that we have more people in the workforce, more taxes. If you have a lower labor force, you have lower employment growth. If you have lower employment growth, then you're going to have lower tax revenues. If you have lower tax revenues, then you're going to have less money for state services like schools, old age pensions, hospital care, all that kind of stuff. All of those are going to double. And the only way you'll be able to pay it is through taxation and things like that. So that is why migration is so important. Even leaving aside, the fact that you might want to retain the Irishness of the country and stuff like that, if we don't have inward migration, we have a choice. Either we all start becoming a lot more fertile and start having a lot more children, in which case our population can grow, or we have to welcome these migrants in, and we have to do that so that the actual economics of the country continue to work in our favor. Otherwise, you're going to have a situation, as unpopular as it sounds, all of us will be getting older and there'll be less money going around. And so it means that you're looking at a future of scarcity, a future where higher taxation, fewer services, and a reduction in the services that are being provided. And if you go back to austerity post-2008, you know what I'm talking about. Taxes were very high. A lot of people just left. Not as much money going around. So all of this, our brothers and sisters in Europe, like the other countries, whether it's France, Spain, Germany, all those kind of countries, they are all seeing a major skills shortage these days. And it's also very evident in this country when it comes to trades. For example, you notice that things like plumbers, electricians, carpenters and stuff are very hard to come by because there's so much construction work to do out there. There's not enough of those skilled workers. So there are currently 182,000 construction workers currently employed in construction in this country. And if we are to address the housing crisis and the ongoing population growth that's expected over the next 40 years, what we need is to get that number, 180,000 construction workers, that needs to be increased by 50,000 people. We need to be up there at 230,000 people, or say 250,000 people working in construction. And that's the only way we're going to have the manpower to actually resolve the housing crisis. Where are those people going to come from? They're not going to be born here in Ireland and, grow to the age of 20 or 15 or whatever, and then become apprentices, and then we'll start to see growth. We need to get those people in now. One of the things that I hear people talking about is AI, and the fact that with artificial intelligence coming, it is going to replace a huge amount of jobs and it's going to make a lot of people unemployed. And that is true if you're the kind of person who sits in front of a computer and does a lot of things that are computer born. But one thing it will not be replacing is the tradesman and woman. You will not see plumbing, electricity and carpentry replaced by AI. I don't see it happening anytime soon. Perhaps when Elon Musk has all his robots running around, that'll be a time. But even those robots, you can't see them squatting down, getting under a kitchen sink and repairing a leaky faucet or something like that. So I think the good news in this whole story is that the tradesmen are probably going to see a big increase in salaries and things like that over the next couple of years. I think things like solicitors and things like that are probably going to come under a lot of AI pressure. There'll probably be a need for fewer solicitors because you'll be able to do the work on, I'm not picking on solicitors per se, but things like professionals, solicitors, accountants, managers, all that. Those kind of jobs, I think, are going to come under pressure from AI. But if you're useful with your hands, bricklayer, any of that kind of stuff, I think that is going to continue to be valuable. Now, on the topic of AI, some of you who are regular listeners will know I did an episode probably about a year ago now, and I was talking about the massive opportunity that AI presents to this country because we have all of these tech companies here in Ireland and they all are piling into AI. They're making huge investments in data centers and stuff. But about a year ago, I was predicting that we're at this really important crossroads where data centers require huge power requirements. They need a lot of power to keep them cool and to run, the air conditioning systems and all that kind of stuff. And so you have got to make an investment in power generation if you're going to continue with the kind of growth of data centers that's taking place. And it was kind of disappointing to see that a year ago or thereabouts, the Dublin City Council brought in this moratorium on the construction of new data centers. They said that no more data centers are allowed to be built in the Dublin area because there's not enough power to service them. And even with these guys now talking about creating their own power stations, like they're talking about putting in huge solar banks, they're putting in air power, they're putting in, they're even talking about nuclear now over in the US at the moment. But Ireland is not doing that. And so already there's talk about a lot of these big computer companies looking abroad and sort of moving to other countries that are making the investment. And so that is disappointing, but also kind of scary because this is the huge opportunity of the next couple of decades. And rather than being in the right place at the right time to actually take advantage of all this, we're in a situation where we're saying, no, stop. You got to stop this. This is causing too much of a problem for us. And so I think that is that's going to be one of the reasons why we could really drop the ball here. And we could be seeing a lot of these big tech companies just moving abroad and saying, you know what, we don't need, if the tax changes, if the tax rates change in some sort of shape or form, they might go to where their data centers are being built rather than being here just because of the tax breaks. Anyway, squandered and lost opportunity. Disappointing. In the US, by the way, they are investing trillions in new power stations. I have a friend who is working in the US at the moment and he's involved in all that kind of stuff. And he was saying that something like the current capacity of power stations in the US, that entire capacity is about to be doubled in just the next 5 years. So it's absolutely staggering the level of investment going into power generation. And we're not doing anything at the moment. So that's a big problem. But getting back to population growth, we are looking at millions of more people coming into Ireland over the next 40 years. And this is going to require a massive increase in our capacity to build houses, to do the planning process, to get that fixed, to get things built on time, to get the land rezoned and the infrastructure put in place to service the land. Like, you don't just rezone a plot of land. You also have to put power to it. You have to put water to it. And you have to have sewage away from it. That all takes time to put in place. And we're not making the investment quick enough in order to do that. And so why does it feel like nobody is paying attention to this? I mean, I know they're paying attention, but it just doesn't feel like there's the urgency that is required. I just read in the last couple of days that Wicklow County Council are going to be voting in the next week or two. And they're voting on the dezoning of 80 hectares of land that is suitable for 3,000 homes. And they're actually dezoning it. They're removing the ability to build 3,000 homes and turning it back to green land or farmland or whatever it was. That is seems just crazy to me. It seems like the government is coming out with this new housing framework, and at the same time, certain county councils are seems to be fighting against the government. So there seems to be power play going on in there. Another thing that I read in the last couple of days, which was just crazy in my view, and just again highlights the issues that we face, is that the report from the government on the number of approvals of new housing that have been approved in quarter number 2 of this year. So we have dropped 12.5% in the number of houses approved this year versus last year. In 2024, in April, May and June of 2024, 8,500 homes were approved for construction. This year, that number is 7,447. So that is a decline of 12.5%. And yet, the numbers are just going up. We've looked at an increase in the inflation in Ireland. The house price inflation continues to go up. Houses are continuing to go up. And so we have a major issue here. We have already identified that we're currently at around 30,000 houses a year. We were trying to get to 40. It doesn't look like we're even going to get past 30,000 houses this year. And yet it's well recognized now that we should be doing 50,000 a year. If we want to do 50,000 a year, then the average number of approvals per quarter should be 12,500. And yet we only hit 7,447. Like that's, 5,000 short. So it just seems like there's no joined up thinking here. And so I don't know, what are your views? I'd love to hear what you think about this whole thing. Housing, the crisis is just set to continue for years and years and years. It's going to be severe housing crisis because of the migration coming in, the lack of construction happening, and even if there was more construction capacity, it doesn't look like we're able to deliver the zoned land and the approvals quick enough to make that happen. And this is why house price inflation hit 7.5% in July alone. And so I don't see this slowing down at all. I would suspect we're going to continue to see a housing crisis for at least decades to come. And the only thing that could really affect it is if there is some sort of a major economic downturn, which is looking like it could be a possibility if you just look at, Donald Trump and the uncertainty of his tariffs and his economic policy and stuff. And also the world is getting more and more uncertain with war in Ukraine. We now see Russia sending jets over Poland and Estonia in the last couple of days. And so these countries have had to scramble their own jets to kind of police this. And it just seems like there's an increase in tensions, and you'd wonder, will this spill over into some sort of armed conflict? And if it does, I think that will most definitely have some sort of an economic impact. It might cause everyone to suddenly go, whoa, what's going to happen? And you suddenly see a downturn. But are we serious about solving the crisis? That is a serious question. I just don't feel like we are. And I saw it mentioned there recently that I think it was one of the papers said that if this was being taken seriously, then the Taoiseach would currently be the Minister of Housing rather than it being a job that somebody else has. The highest job in the country should be focused on housing. That's an interesting view. If you could fix it and you're the government, so you're the only one who can fix it, what would you do to get it fixed? I mean, we have to get it fixed. It's not complicated. Let's just get it done. So, guys, hope you found this one interesting. Curious to know what you think. Be sure to send me a message if you're connected with me on social media or anything like that, what your thoughts are. But also a quick reminder, I have my Investor Summit event coming up. It's a member-only event, but the membership is open. So there's an intake at the moment. I'm bringing new members on board. Anyone who's interested in growing a portfolio, a property portfolio, and establishing themselves with a portfolio that brings in regular income, that's what we teach inside the Accelerator, and that's what we're going to be talking about on the first Saturday of October. So if you're hearing this and you're interested, if that sounds like you, do reach out and I'll be happy to jump on a call and we'll have a conversation about joining the program. Guys, talk to you next week.